Весна 1943 года. Северная Атлантика. Немецкий командир подводной лодки сидит у перископа и наблюдает, как очередной британский конвой медленно ползет по горизонту. За его плечами уже 17 месяцев войны. Вокруг его лодки рвануло 347 глубинных бомб. Он выучил этот танец наизусть. Британский эсминец сейчас разгонится, пройдет прямо над ним, потеряет контакт. На 30 секунд. Ровно в эти 30 секунд он положит руль лево на борт, уйдет еще на 50 футов вниз, и бомбы разорвутся точно там, где он только что был. Он проделывал это 23 раза. Проделает и 24-й. Но этот командир еще не знает ни один. Немецкий морской офицер пока не знает, что Королевский флот только что ввел в бой оружие, которое все изменит. Оружие настолько эффективное, что выжившие немецкие подводники даже не смогут понять, что именно их ударило. Оружие, которое окажется в 10 раз смертоноснее всех глубинных бомб, которые британцы сбросили до сих пор. Оружие, которое перевернет ход битвы за Атлантику. Это история о том, как британская смекалка разбила немецкие расчеты, как канадский химик и один упрямый армейский офицер-одиночка создали то, чего враг даже в страшном сне не ожидал, как оружие под названием «хеджхог» доказало, иногда самые тихие изобретения производят самый громкий взрыв. Вернемся к самому началу, к тому моменту, когда Британия стояла одна, а немецкие подлодки хозяйничали в Атлантике. 1940 год. Франция пала. Британия сражается без союзников, а под водой немецкие командиры подводных лодок наслаждаются тем, что потом назовут счастливым временем. Математика уничтожения простая.
The official British historian Stephen Roskill will later write that the Germans never came so near to disrupting communications between the New World and the Old as they did in the first 20 days of March 1943. Winston Churchill will call the Battle of the Atlantic the dominating factor all through the war. Never for one moment, he says, could we forget that everything happening elsewhere depended ultimately on its outcome. D-Day, the liberation of Europe, victory itself, all impossible if the supply lines are cut. The German U-boat commanders know they are winning. They have learned to exploit a fatal weakness in British anti-submarine tactics. The weakness is this. Every time a British destroyer attacks with depth charges, the submarine has a window of escape. A gift of 30 seconds when the hunter becomes blind. Here is how it works. The destroyer detects the submarine using ASTIC, the echolocation system the Americans call sonar. The destroyer closes in, accelerates to attack speed, but ASTIC has a blind spot. The beam tilts downward at a shallow angle. It cannot look directly beneath the ship, so at about 300 yards range, when the destroyer passes over the submarine, contact is lost. For 20 to 30 seconds, the submarine vanishes from British sensors. During those 30 seconds, the submarine commander acts. Hard turn to port or starboard. Dive deeper. Change speed. Point the bow toward the attacker to reduce the sonar reflection. By the time the depth charges explode, he has moved. Not far, perhaps 50 yards. But in the ocean, 50 yards is the difference between death and survival. The depth charges themselves have another fatal limitation. Each charge weighs 300 to 600 pounds, packed with high explosive. They sink at about 12 to 16 feet per second. A depth charge set for 200 feet takes 20 to 30 seconds to reach that depth. During that time, the submarine is taking evasive action. And when the charges finally explode, they must detonate within 14 feet of the submarine to cause fatal damage. 14 feet. In the darkness of the North Atlantic, 300 feet down, finding a submarine within 14 feet is what one British report calls a matter of luck.
И вот в эти 30 секунд командир действует. Резкий поворот влево или вправо, глубже, смена скорости, носом на атакующего, чтобы уменьшить отражение сигнала. К моменту, когда рвутся глубинные бомбы, он уже ушел, может, всего на 50 ярдов. Но в океане 50 ярдов — это разница между жизнью и смертью. У самих глубинных бомб есть еще одно фатальное ограничение. Каждая весит от 300 до 600 фунтов, набита взрывчаткой. тонет со скоростью 12-16 футов в секунду. Бомба, выставленная на 200 футов, добирается до глубины за 20-30 секунд. За это время подлодка успевает маневрировать. А когда бомбы все-таки рвутся, они должны взорваться не дальше 14 футов от корпуса, чтобы нанести смертельные повреждения. 14 футов. На глубине 300 футов в кромешной тьме Северной Атлантики найти подлодку с точностью до 14 футов, как писали в одном британском докладе, дело чистой удачи. Цифры говорят сами за себя. В первые месяцы войны глубинные бомбы дают 5% успеха, 5 потопленных лодок на 100. А так, в обычных боевых условиях 3%. Одна стандартная серия бомб имеет 3% вероятности убить. 5 атак поднимают шанс лишь до 10%. Но это еще не все. Каждый взрыв глубинных бомб создает чудовищные акустические помехи, миллионы пузырьков, стена шума после, которой аздик слепнет минут на 15. Подлодка уходит за этой акустической дымовой завесой. Британские эсминцы часто считают, что добились успеха, когда видят на поверхности масло, но масло специально выкачивают из бака подлодки, чтобы обмануть врага. Лодка уходит незамеченной. Немецкие подводники научились доверять этому ритму. Они выживают именно потому, что британское оружие дает им время.
Every time the depth charges explode, they create a massive acoustic disruption. Millions of tiny bubbles, a wall of noise that makes Aztec completely useless for 15 minutes. The submarine can slip away behind this acoustic smokescreen. British destroyers often assume they have scored a kill when they see oil on the surface. But the oil is a ruse, pumped from the submarine's tanks. The U-boat escapes undetected. The German submariners learn to trust this pattern. They survive because the British weapon gives them time to react. One U-boat, U-427, survives 678 depth charges in a single month in April 1945. 678 explosions and the boat lives. The mathematics are devastating for Britain. The Royal Navy conducts 5,174 depth charge attacks during the war. These attacks sink 85.5 U-boats, 5,000 attacks, 85 kills. This is a success rate of 1.65%. It takes an average of 60 attacks to sink a single submarine. Each attack uses 6 to 14 depth charges, hundreds of explosives expended for each kill. By early 1943, the situation is critical. U-boats are sinking ships faster than Britain can replace them. The supply situation is becoming unsustainable. Churchill knows it. The Admiralty knows it. Unless something changes, Britain will lose the war not through invasion, but through starvation and isolation. Something has to change. Someone has to find a better way. That someone is a 37-year-old Canadian chemist named Charles Frederick Goodeve. Born in Nepawa, Manitoba, on February 21st, 1904. Goodeve has spent his career solving impossible problems. He earned his doctorate in chemistry at University College London. When war breaks out, he joins the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve as a lieutenant commander. His specialty is what the Navy calls miscellaneous weapons development. Others call his department the Wheezers and Dodgers. Goodeve prefers a different description. He calls it cutting through red tape by any means necessary. Goodeve has already proven his worth. He developed the degaussing technique that protects Allied ships from magnetic mines. The Royal Commission on Awards to Inventors gives him £7,500 for that achievement. Now, in spring 1941, he is looking at the depth charge problem, and he sees something everyone else has missed. The problem is not the explosive. The problem is the delivery method. British destroyers are attacking from behind. They must pass over the submarine, lose contact, then hope the charges sink to the right depth at the right location. What if, Goodeve wonders, we could attack from ahead, fire the weapon forward while we still have sonar contact, keep the submarine in sight throughout the entire attack? The idea is brilliant. The execution will require help. Enter Lieutenant Colonel Latham Valentine Stewart Blacker. 54 years old in 1941, Blacker is a career army officer who served in the Indian Army, Afghanistan, Turkestan, Russia. He learned to fly in 1911, one of the first certified pilots in Britain. More importantly, he is an inventor. In the 1930s, Blacker developed something called a spigot mortar. Instead of firing a projectile from a tube, the spigot mortar uses a rod that fits inside the projectile. When fired, the projectile travels up the rod and launches forward. The system is simpler, lighter, more reliable than conventional mortars. Blacker has already adapted his spigot mortar into an anti-tank weapon called the Blacker bombard. Now, introduced to Goodeve through military intelligence connections, he agrees to try adapting it for naval use. The two men, along with their team at the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, begin work. They face enormous challenges. The projectile must be heavy enough to sink quickly, but light enough to fire from a ship. It must penetrate the water without breaking apart. It must sink vertically, not slide sideways. It must detonate only on contact with a submarine hull, not on its spring. 1943, the North Atlantic. A German U-boat commander sits at his periscope, watching another British convoy crawl across the horizon. He has survived 17 months of war. 347 depth charges have exploded around his boat. He knows the pattern by heart now. The British destroyer will accelerate, pass overhead, lose contact for 30 seconds. During those 30 seconds, he will turn hard to port, dive another 50 feet, and the depth charges will explode exactly where he used to be. He has done this 23 times. He will do it again. What this commander does not know, what no German naval officer yet understands, is that the Royal Navy has just deployed a weapon that will change everything. A weapon so effective that German submariners who survive attacks cannot even identify what hit them. A weapon that will prove 10 times deadlier than every depth charge the British have dropped. A weapon that will turn the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic. This is the story of how British innovation defeated German expectations, how a Canadian chemist and a maverick army officer created something the enemy never saw coming, how the weapon called Hedgehog proved that sometimes the quietest inventions make the loudest impact. Let us go back to where it began, to the moment when Britain stood alone and German U-boats ruled the Atlantic. 1940. France has fallen. Britain fights without allies, and beneath the waves, German submarine commanders are enjoying what they will later call the happy time. The mathematics of destruction are simple and brutal. A Type 7 U-boat carries 14 torpedoes. Each convoy has 30 to 50 merchant ships. The odds favor the hunter. By the end of 1942, U-boats have sent more than 1,300 Allied merchant ships to the bottom. Not 1,300 tons, 1,300 ships, each one carrying food, fuel, ammunition, tanks, aircraft, everything Britain needs to survive. In March 1943 alone, German submarines sink 567,000 tons of Allied shipping. This is their peak, their finest hour, packed with the water. And it must do all this from a launcher that can survive the salt, the motion, and the violence of North Atlantic combat. They test hundreds of projectile designs. They build a device they call the roulette wheel, a scale model submarine surrounded by a grid. They throw thousands of test projectiles to determine the optimal firing pattern. Should the projectiles land in a circle, an ellipse, a square, they calculate, measure, adjust, recalculate. By May 1941, they have a prototype ready. The weapon is installed on HMS Westcott, a W-class destroyer, replacing her forward 4-inch gun. The ship conducts trials in Liverpool Bay, firing at a known wreck. The results, according to the official report, show the weapon function perfectly. But Goodeve faces a new problem. The Royal Navy establishment does not want his weapon. They have spent decades perfecting depth-charge tactics. They have trained thousands of sailors in those tactics. Now this Canadian chemist and this army colonel are proposing to replace proven methods with an untested device. The resistance, Goodeve will later recall, is furious. Goodeve needs someone with authority to override the objections. He needs Winston Churchill. In late 1942, Goodeve arranges a demonstration at Whitchurch, near the Prime Minister's country residence at Chequers. Churchill arrives expecting to watch a brief test. Instead, he becomes fascinated. He watches multiple salvos. He asks technical questions. He forgets about lunch. At the end of the demonstration, Churchill gives a simple order. Put this weapon into production immediately. Production begins. By the end of 1942, more than 100 ships carry the weapon. The sailors call it the hedgehog, because when you look at the empty launcher spigots from certain angles, they resemble the spines on a hedgehog's back. When loaded with 24 projectiles mounted on cradles, the resemblance becomes unmistakable. The hedgehog is unlike anything the Germans have encountered. 24 projectiles, each 7.2 inches in diameter, 46.5 inches long, weighing 65 pounds. Each projectile carries 35 pounds of torpex, an explosive more powerful than TNT. The projectiles are arranged in 4 rows of 6 on a gimbal mount that compensates for the ship's roll. When fired, they launch in a staggered sequence, so the highest trajectory projectiles fire first. All 24 land simultaneously in a near-elliptical pattern, roughly 120 by 140 feet, at a range of 200 yards. The projectiles sink at 22 to 23.5 feet per second, 3 times faster than depth charges. They reach 200 feet in under 9 seconds, 750 feet in just over 30 seconds. There is no depth setting to adjust, no timer to set. It fuse arms when the projectile hits the water. It detonates only on contact with a hard surface. A submarine hull. This is the critical innovation that the Germans do not understand and cannot counter. When a hedgehog projectile misses, it does not explode. It sinks silently to the ocean floor. The British destroyer maintains sonar contact throughout the attack. If the pattern misses, the ship can immediately attack again. No 15-minute wait for the acoustic disturbance to clear. No guessing where the submarine has gone. The hunter remains locked on target, and when a hedgehog projectile hits, the submarine dies. 35 pounds of torpex detonating against the outer hull, punching through to the pressure hull. At depth, the submarine is already under enormous pressure. A 3 or 4 inch hole will flood the boat at 400 gallons per minute. The temperature inside will climb 200 to 300 degrees, searing lungs. The crew has perhaps 4 minutes before the pressure hull collapses. Usually death is instantaneous. The first confirmed hedgehog kills came in late 1942 and early 1943, once the weapon had been issued to about 100 escorts. The initial success rate is disappointing, only about 5%. Many captains are reluctant to use the new weapon. They trust their depth charges. Some do not understand how hedgehog works. The training manuals are inadequate. The Admiralty issues a directive requiring captains to explain why they have not used hedgehog in attacks. The breakthrough comes in mid-1943. The Royal Navy establishes intensive training at HMS Ferret in Londonderry, Northern Ireland. Crews learn to integrate hedgehog with improved sonar. They learn the optimal attack geometry, precise moment to fire. They learn to trust that silent misses mean they can attack again immediately. The success rate climbs 10%, 15%. By late 1943, some well-trained escort groups achieve success rates in the 25 to 30% range, making hedgehog over 10 times as lethal per attack as depth charges, and in the best documented cases, approaching 15 times more effective. The Germans, meanwhile, are dying without understanding why. This is perhaps the most devastating aspect of hedgehog. When a submarine survives a depth charge attack, the crew knows what happened. They heard the explosions, felt the concussions, counted the charges. They can report the attack pattern to naval intelligence. German tacticians can analyze and develop countermeasures. But hedgehog is different. When a hedgehog attack misses, the projectiles sink silently. The submarine crew hears nothing unusual. They assume they were attacked with depth charges and successfully evaded. When a hedgehog attack succeeds, everyone dies. There are no survivors to report what happened. No wreckage floating to the surface to examine. German naval intelligence cannot identify the weapon. They know that British anti-submarine effectiveness has suddenly, dramatically improved, but they do not know why. Herbert Werner, a German U-boat commander who survives the war and later writes his memoir Iron Coffins, describes the apocalyptic final years of destruction, disillusionment, and defeat. His book extensively covers 1943 through 1945, but he never mentions hedgehog by name. He cannot. He does not know it exists. What Werner and his fellow commanders do know is that the survival odds have collapsed. In 1942, U-boats could expect to survive multiple patrols. By 1943, survival has become unlikely. By 1944, it is nearly impossible. Of 842 operational U-boats, 779 will be sunk. a loss rate of 92.5%.
60.
Of 39,000
5 /
U-boat
5.
personnel,
7 =
28,000 will
6.
die. A casualty rate of 75%.
Смертоноснее.
May 1943 marks the
Лучших
turn.
эскортных групп соотношение доходило до 15:1. Это некрасивые слова. Это официальные цифры Королевского флота, проверенные и подтвержденные десятками историков. Но цифры не передают того, что чувствовали. Люди. Командир Дональд Макинтайр, один из самых результативных убийц подлодок Британии, 7 подтвержденных побед на счету. Март 1941-го он на эсминце Уокер топит Ю-99 и берет в плен самого Отто Кречмера, немецкого аса номер 1. Кречмер плывет к борту в своем фуражке с золотым галлоном и с подарочным цейсовским биноклем. От самого Дёница британский офицер успевает выхватить бинокль раньше, чем немец его утопит. Макинтайр будет пользоваться этим трофеем до конца войны. 4 месяца спустя, уже на Гесперусе, Макинтайр идет на таран Ю-93. Удар такой силы, что немецкого командира и старшего помощника выбрасывает прямо в шлюпку, висящую на борту британского эсминца. Капитан-лейтенант Хорст Клаусен остается единственным командиром подлодки, которому удалось пережить встречу с кораблем Макинтайра. И вот этот самый Макинтайр потом скажет просто: «Пока у нас были только глубинные бомбы, мы играли с подлодками в кошки-мышки. Пришел Ёж, и игра кончилась». Клаусен проведет остаток войны в канадском лагере для военнопленных, выживет, вернется в Берлин и умрет в 2008 году в возрасте 91 года. А в 1943 на корабле Макинтайра уже стоит. Ёж, 23 April 1943 года, конвой ОНС Гесперус топит Ю-191, первое подтвержденное убийство Макинтайра ежом. Через 3 недели,
Not through
12 мая,
propaganda,
конвой
not through superior numbers,
СИ-129
through innovation that proved German
отправляет над
assumptions
Ю-86.
catastrophically wrong.
Обе атаки,
Let us look at
как
the
по
evidence.
учебнику,
The
контакт не
cold,
потерян.
documented
Ни на
mathematics that
секунду.
prove Hedgehog's
Залп вперед.
superiority.
Мощный
The
подводный
Royal
взрыв.
Navy conducts
Масло.
268
Обломки.
Hedgehog
Ни
attacks during the
одного
war. These
выжившего.
attacks sink
Макинтайр
47
потом
U-boats.
напишет:
This is a
глубинные
success
бомбы
rate of
давали
17.5%.
надежду.
Compare this
Ёж
to depth
дал
charges.
уверенность.
5,174 attacks.
Значит,
85.5 kills,
можно бить снова.
1.65% success
Услышал
rate.
взрыв.
The ratio is
Значит,
precise and
всё,
devastating.
лодке конец.
Depth charges require
Но,
60.5 attacks per
пожалуй,
kill.
самое
Hedgehog
полное и
requires
самое
5.7
человеческое.
attacks per kill.
История
Divide
про
60.5
Ёж
by
случилась не у
5.7. The
британцев,
answer is
а у канадцев
10.6.
с речным
Hedgehog is
фрегатом
10.6
этим
times more
съезд в
effective than
Аскису
depth charges.
и подлодкой
In some well-trained
Ю-257
escort groups, the
24
ratio
февраля
approaches 15 to 1, 10
1944
times
года.
deadlier.
Лейтенант-командир
not
Джеймс
rhetoric.
Фрейзер
It is
командует.
documented fact,
В Аскису
verified by
всего
official
19
Royal Navy
дней.
records,
Корабль
confirmed
сопровождает
by
конвой
multiple independent
ОНС-29
historians.
через
But statistics
Северную
alone do not
Атлантику.
capture what this meant
2
in
часа
combat.
оператор
For
Азика
that, we need to hear
докладывает
from the men
контакт.
who fought.
Пеллинг 170
Commander
градусов.
Donald McIntyre of the
Дистанция
Royal Navy is
1200
one of
ярдов.
Britain's top U-boat
Фрейзер
killers,
объявляет
with
боевую
7
тревогу.
confirmed sinkings.
В Аскису.
In March
Ложится на курс
1941,
движения.
commanding HMS
2 часа
Walker,
10
he
минут.
sinks
Первый залп
U-99
ежа.
and captures Germany's top ace,
24.
Otto
Снаряды
Kretschmer.
уходят в ночь дугой.
Kretschmer is
Падают
swimming
в воду
toward
почти
Walker,
без
still wearing
звука.
his brass-bound cap,
Секунды тишины.
and the special
Промах.
Zeiss
Но контакт
binoculars that Admiral
держится.
Dönitz personally
Фрейзер
gave him.
приказывает
A
перезаряжать.
British officer
2
grabs the
часа
binoculars
26
before
минут.
Kretschmer can throw them
Атака
overboard.
глубинными бомбами,
McIntyre keeps them as a
выгнать немца
prize,
на поверхность
uses
или
them for the
заставить
rest of the
ошибиться.
war.
Бомбы
4 months
трясут
later,
лодку,
commanding
но
HMS Hesperus, McIntyre
Ю-257
rams
молчит и
U-93.
остается
The
глубоко.
collision is so
Часы
violent
идут.
it flings the U-boat's
Команда
captain
Азика
and
не
first
теряет
lieutenant
цель
into a
ни на
motorboat stowed on
минуту.
Hesperus's deck.
Оператор Минц потом
The captain,
вспомнит.
Kapitan
Кровь стучала
Leutnant
в
Horst
висках.
Elfer,
Страхи,
is rescued. The
адреналин.
only submarine
Приказы
commander to
сыпались
survive
один
an
за
encounter
другим.
with
Но
McIntyre's
контакт
ship.
мы держали
Elf
железно.
spends the rest of the war as a
4 часа
prisoner in
10 минут
Canada,
Фрейзеру приходит
survives,
приказ
returns
бросить
to
охоту и
Berlin,
возвращаться к
dies in
конвою.
2008,
Он просит
aged
разрешения на
91.
один
By
последний залп.
1943,
Чуйка
McIntyre's
подсказывает.
ship carries
Лодка
Hedgehog.
повреждена,
On April
еле
23,
держится.
1943,
Разрешение
escorting
получено.
convoy
5
ONS-4,
часов 50
Hesperus
минут
sinks
Ю-257
U-191.
всплывает.
First confirmed
Разбитая,
Hedgehog
не
kill for
может не
McIntyre.
погрузиться.
3
Не
weeks
дать
later,
ход.
May 12,
Сидячая утка,
convoy
как скажет потом
SC-129,
артиллерийский
Hesperus
офицер
sinks
Стивенсон.
U-186.
Канадские пушки
Both
открывают
attacks
огонь.
follow the same pattern.
Фрейзер.
Sonar
Великолепная
contact maintained
стрельба.
throughout.
Наш первый
Hedgehog fired while
Эрликон
target
не
still
потратил
visible.
ни одного
Massive
лишнего.
underwater
Патрона.
explosion. Oil and
Командир
debris. No survivors.
Ю-257
McIntyre will later write that Hedgehog gave him something depth charges never could: confidence. When he fired Hedgehog and heard nothing, he knew he had missed cleanly and could attack again immediately. When he heard the detonation, he knew the submarine was finished. Perhaps the most complete Hedgehog narrative comes from the Royal Canadian Navy, from a river-class frigate named HMCS Waskiesiu and her encounter with U-257, February 24, 1944. Lieutenant Commander Fraser has commanded Waskiesiu for only 19 days. His ship is escorting convoy Owens 29 through the North Atlantic. At 0200 hours, the Aztec operator reports contact. A submarine bearing 170 degrees, range 1,200 yards. Fraser calls the crew to action stations. Waskiesiu closes in. At 0200 hours, Fraser orders the first Hedgehog attack. The 24 projectiles arc through the darkness. They land with barely audible splashes. Seconds pass. Nothing. The attackers missed, but Fraser still has sonar contact. He orders immediate reload. At 0226 hours, Fraser attacks with depth charges, trying to force the submarine to surface or make a mistake. The charges, the report will later say, rocked the quarry, but U-257 stays deep, stays silent. Hours pass. They did not want to leave us. We had grown to like them. Then he adds, however, we have not forgotten the Tweed. The Tweed, a Canadian destroyer, was torpedoed by a U-boat. 47 Canadians died. The survivors remember, but they also treat their enemies with humanity. George Devonshire, Waskiesiu's Hedgehog operator, says it must have been pure hell down there. You could hear them calling out as we pulled away. This is not triumph. This is acknowledgement that war is brutal for everyone, that courage exists on both sides, that British and Commonwealth values mean treating enemies with dignity even in the moment of victory. The most dramatic Hedgehog story comes not from British or Canadian ships, but from the United States Navy, from a destroyer escort named USS England and her astonishing 12-day rampage in May 1944. England is a Buckley-class destroyer escort commissioned in December 1943. All American destroyer escorts carry Hedgehog as standard equipment. England's commanding officer is Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton, but the tactical genius is her executive officer, Lieutenant John Williamson, 26 years old, from Birmingham, Alabama. Williamson has what one historian will call a remarkable combination of battle experience, technical knowledge, and passion. May 19, 1944, south of the Admiralty Islands in the Pacific, England is hunting Japanese submarines forming a picket line to intercept American forces. At 13:25 hours, Soundman Roger Bernhardt reports contact. Echoes sharp and clear, sir. Sound is good. England closes in. Williamson takes tactical command. At 14:33 hours, he orders the fifth Hedgehog attack of the day. The pattern lands perfectly. At 14:35 hours, a giant blast lifts England's fantail out of the water. Williamson will later recall, at first we thought we had been torpedoed, but it is not a torpedo. It is a 16, a Japanese submarine breaking apart 200 feet below. 107 submariners die. An oil slick 3 miles by 6 miles spreads across the Pacific. 3 days later, May 22nd, 0444 hours, England sinks RO-106. 49 crewmen lost. May 23rd, 0834 hours, England sinks RO-104. 58 souls lost. The Japanese commander of this boat is cagey, skilled. 2 other American destroyers, George and Raby, fail multiple attacks. Williamson's Hedgehog pattern achieves a dozen hits. The submarine is obliterated. May 24th, 0214 hours, England sinks RO-116. 56 hands lost. This Japanese commander fights masterfully. England's soundman John Prock suggests a ruse. Keep the sonar ping at a steady rate to convince the enemy they have not been detected. The tactic works. May 26th, 23:23 hours, England sinks RO-108. 58 men lost. Wreckage surfaces, including mahogany from the submarine's chronometer. May 30th through 31st, England engages RO-105 in a 2-day battle. The Japanese commander is, according to intelligence reports, most able submarine officer in the Imperial Japanese Navy. At one point, the Japanese radio taunts the Americans. "We are not telling you where we are. On May 31st, 0736 hours, more than 10 Hedgehog projectiles strike at 180 feet. 55 crewmen lost. 6 submarines in 12 days. This remains the most successful anti-submarine operation by a single ship in naval history." Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, signals England directly. There will always be an England in the United States Navy, but the victory troubles Lieutenant Williamson. A young seaman asks him, "Sir, how do you feel about killing all those men?" Williamson answers honestly, "War is about killing. And the more ships they sank, the sooner it would be over." But this answer, he will later admit, continued to trouble him for the rest of his days. England has taken the lives of more men than she has aboard. Williamson understands the necessity, but understanding does not erase the weight. This is the reality that Hedgehog operators across the Allied navies must face. The weapon is devastatingly effective. Each hit means dozens of enemy sailors drowning or crushed or burned alive in a steel coffin at the bottom of the ocean. Winston Churchill recognizing genius when he saw it, and cutting through bureaucracy to make it happen. It is a story of courage on all sides. British destroyer crews risking their lives in North Atlantic storms. Canadian frigate sailors rescuing enemies from freezing water. American destroyer escort crews facing Japanese submarines in the Pacific. German submariners fighting in iron coffins knowing their survival odds are nearly zero. Japanese submariners maintaining discipline even as Hedgehog destroyed them. It is a story of the difference between Allied and Axis values. When HMCS Waskesiu pulls German sailors from the water, they are given medical care, food, dignity. When British POWs fall into German hands, some are shot. When Soviet POWs fall into German hands, most are worked to death or starved. The contrast is stark and documented, and ultimately it is a story of British ingenuity proving German assumptions wrong. The Germans assumed U-boats could evade depth charges indefinitely. Wrong. The Germans assumed Britain lacked the scientific capability to innovate faster than Germany. Wrong. The Germans assumed British crews were less skilled than German crews. Wrong. The Germans assumed they could outlast Britain in a war of attrition. Wrong. Hedgehog is the proof, rendered in steel and torpex and mathematics. 10.6 times more effective than depth charges. 47 U-boats sunk from 268 attacks. Fraser's Aztec team never loses contact. The Aztec operator Menzies will later recall blood and fear running through your body, orders coming fast, but they hold the contact. Fraser trusts his team. At 0410 hours, after multiple attacks, Fraser is ordered to abandon the hunt and rejoin the convoy. He requests permission for one more attack, just one more. His intuition tells him the submarine is damaged, struggling. Permission granted. At 0550 hours, U-257 surfaces, crippled, unable to dive, unable to run. Waskesiu's gunnery officer Stevenson will later say he could not miss at that range. She was a sitting duck. The Canadian guns are, in Fraser's words, wonderful gunnery. Our number one Oerlikon never wasted a cartridge. Aboard U-257, Captain Lieutenant Heinz Ryer knows his boat is finished. He orders the crew to abandon ship. Then he climbs to the conning tower. Able seaman Arthur Wall, manning one of Waskesiu's guns, sees Ray through his gun sight. The German commander is waving his arms, signaling surrender. Then Ray throws his life jacket to his men in the water. He throws an inflatable dinghy. He makes sure his crew has a chance. Then he goes back below. He goes down with his boat. U-257's boat sinks. The stern rises vertical. 15 minutes after surfacing, the submarine disappears. In the darkness, Waskesiu's crew hears voices. "Hello, comrade." German submariners swimming in the North Atlantic in February. Wall will later say he had to feel sympathy for men in those cold conditions. Lieutenant Zursey, Waldemar Nickel, U-257's third watch officer, survives 45 minutes in the water on what he describes as a pitch-dark moonlit night. 19 men are pulled aboard Waskesiu. Nickel and his fellow survivors are given showers, dry clothes, hot food. They are treated by all accounts with complete correctness. One ardent Nazi among them keeps declaring England kaput. But others are quietly stunned. The Canadians share their rations. The crew talks to the German sailors, discovers they are just young men, much like themselves. When the survivors are finally transferred to another ship for transport to POW camps, Able seaman Gordon Arnold will recall there is no glory in this, only grim necessity. The Battle of the Atlantic is an existential struggle. Britain will starve if the supply lines are cut. The war will be lost. Hedgehog gives the Allies the advantage they need, but the cost in human life on both sides is terrible. Waldemar Nickel, the German officer who survived U-257, gives us a rare glimpse of what Hedgehog attacks felt like from inside the submarine. Sounds of impacting rounds nearly drowned out shouts of command, he recalls. Could smell powder smoke even in the control room. A lot of water entered through several leaks and rudders were blocked. Fortunately, no panic when crew climbed out. Nickel does not mention the terror, but we can imagine it. Sitting in a metal tube 300 feet below the surface, hearing explosions so close you smell the powder. Feeling the boat shudder, knowing that one direct hit will end everything. The fear must have been overwhelming. That Nickel and his shipmates maintained discipline, climbed out without panic, speaks to their training and courage, the same courage that British and Commonwealth submariners display when facing Japanese and German anti-submarine weapons. By May 1945, the war in Europe is ending. On May 6th, one day after Germany's surrender, USS Atherton and USS Moberly detect a submarine off Rhode Island. U-853, one of the last operational U-boats, still at war despite the surrender. The American ships attack with Hedgehog. All 55 crew members die. U-853 becomes the last U-boat sunk in the Atlantic. The wreck lies in 127 feet of water. Now a dive site, a steel tomb and a memorial. The final statistics tell the story. Hedgehog's impact cannot be denied. The Royal Navy's 47 kills from 268 attacks. The United States Navy's kills throughout the Pacific. The Royal Canadian Navy's multiple confirmed sinkings in 1944 and 45. The weapon proves itself again and again. But Hedgehog does not win the Battle of the Atlantic alone. No single weapon wins a war. The victory comes from integration. Improved ASDEC, 10-centimeter radar, high-frequency direction finding, very long-range B-24 Liberators closing the mid-Atlantic air gap, escort carriers providing constant air cover, Mark 24, Fido acoustic homing torpedoes dropped from aircraft, ultra-intelligence from broken German codes, improved tactics, better training, more ships, more escorts. Hedgehog is one component in this system, but it is an essential component. Robert Rumble of the Imperial War Museum writes, by summer 1943, the combination of advanced escort vessels, ASDEC and sonar, long-range patrol aircraft, and weapons such as Hedgehog and Squid had finally defeated the U-boat threat. The vital sea lanes were now fully open. This was crucial for D-Day. Without victory in the Battle of the Atlantic, there is no D-Day. Without D-Day, the war continues for years, perhaps decades. The atomic bomb is used on Germany instead of Japan. The Soviet Union conquers all of Europe. History tilts in directions we cannot predict. The Battle of the Atlantic is not a sideshow. It is the foundation on which Allied victory is built, and Hedgehog is part of that foundation. The weapon that gave British, Canadian and American escort crews a tool that worked, a weapon they could trust, a weapon that killed submarines instead of just frightening them away. After the war, Hedgehog influences anti-submarine weapons for 50 years. The Royal Navy developed Squid, a 3-barreled head-throwing mortar, then Limbo, a more sophisticated version. The United States creates Astrock, the anti-submarine rocket. The Soviet Union directly copies Hedgehog as the MBU-200, then develops the RBU-6000, still in use today. Every modern head-throwing anti-submarine weapon traces its lineage to Charles Goodeve's innovation and Stuart Blacker's Spigot mortar. The principle Hedgehog establishes becomes doctrine: attack while maintaining contact. Use contact fuse that detonate only on the target. Keep the weapon small enough to carry many projectiles, but powerful enough to kill with a single hit. These principles define anti-submarine warfare through the Cold War and beyond. Charles Goodeve receives recognition for his work. He is knighted, becomes Sir Charles Goodeve. He continues contributing to military research after the war, works in civilian industry, dies in 1980, aged 76. Stuart Blacker receives £25,000 from the Royal Commission on awards to inventors, substantial compensation for his Spigot mortar patents. He retires from the Territorial
лечение.
Army in October
Когда
1942,
британцы
dies in
попадали в немецкие руки,
1964.
их могли
Donald
просто
McIntyre
пристрелить.
survives the war,
Когда
writes several
советские
books about his
почти всегда
experiences,
лагерь и
becomes a
смерть.
respected
И в
naval
конечном
historian,
счете эта
dies
история
in
о том,
1981.
как
John
британская
Williamson is
смекалка
promoted to
разбила
commanding
немецкую
officer of USS
самоуверенность в
England in
щепки.
September
Немцы
1944,
считали, что
serves
подлодки
with
будут
distinction,
вечно уходить.
later questions the
А
morality of his
глубинных бомб
wartime kills,
ошиблись.
dies in
Считали,
2008.
что Британия не способна изобрести
Herbert Werner,
что-то.
the German U-boat
Быстрее
commander,
Германии.
settles in the United
Ошиблись.
States after the war,
Считали своих
writes his
моряков
memoir
лучше
Iron Coffins,
подготовленными.
dies in
Ошиблись.
2013 at
Считали,
age
что
91,
выстоят в войне
never
на
knowing the
истощение.
weapon that hunted him was
Ошиблись
called Hedgehog.
жесточайшим.
The
Образом,
men of HMCS
доказательства
Waskesiu returned to
стали
Canada after the
торпексы
war.
и цифрах.
Some stay in touch with each other.
10,6
They remember
раза эффективнее
U-257.
глубинных бомб.
They remember Captain
47
Lieutenant
подлодок
Rahl
с
going down with his boat after
268
saving his
атак.
men.
20%
They remember the German
против
survivors who
1% у
became
старого
briefly
оружия.
almost
Это не
friends.
оценки.
Gordon Arnold's
Это
words remain
официальные
apt.
документы.
We have not forgotten,
Адмиралтейство,
but we treated them with
проверенные
humanity.
десятками историков
This
и
is the British and
подтвержденные
Commonwealth
державами.
way of war.
Островами на дне
Fight with
Атлантики.
determination.
Оружие,
Innovate without
которого
hesitation.
немцы не
Show the
ждали.
enemy no mercy in
Изобретение,
combat.
которое
treat
они
prisoners
так и
with
не смогли
dignity.
опознать.
Follow the
Британский
rules
ответ,
even when the enemy does not.
перевернувший все.
Maintain
Самых
values
темных
even
дней
in the depths of total war.
1940 до
These
победного
are not
мая.
propaganda claims. They are
1945
documented facts.
доказал.
German POWs in
Иногда
British
самые
camps
тихие
receive 3
изобретения
meals
гремят
daily.
громче всех
They are allowed to
взрывов.
form theatre
В мире
groups. They are permitted
гениальность
to write
побеждает
home.
численность.
British families invite
Упорство
them for Sunday
ломает любые
tea.
расчеты.
Many choose to stay in
Британская
Britain after the
смекалка,
war ends.
канадская
Hedgehog
отвага
is a
и
weapon of
союзническое
war.
братство вместе
But the story
способны
of Hedgehog is more
выиграть
than a
самую
story of
важную
killing.
битву войны.
It is a story of
Битву за
innovation under
Атлантику.
pressure, of
Битву,
civilian
без которой
scientists
все.
and military officers
Остальное было
working
бы
together,
невозможно.
of overcoming
Битву,
institutional
которую Британия
resistance through determination and
ежом
evidence,
в
of a
качестве
Canadian chemist and an
одного из
English
самых
army colonel
точных и
creating
страшных
something
своих
neither
клинков
could have made
в
alone,
конечном
of
итоге
Winston
выиграл.
Churchill